Hello, good people, and welcome to Finest Skills Hub. Here, we learn, we connect, and we grow. Well, this is a special video. This is video number 200 on our Finest Skills Hub YouTube channel. We thank God for this milestone, and thank you so much for your support throughout the years. If you are here, you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe so you can get updates on all our subsequent releases. Well, to celebrate this milestone, we are doing something special. This video is a full course, an introductory Power BI video. We are taking you from installation all the way to creating an interactive Power BI report. So if you don't know about Power BI, it's Microsoft's business intelligence and data analytics tool that allows you to connect to data, transform the data using Power Query. If you have multiple tables, that allows you to create a data model, connect all these tables, create very insightful calculations using a formula language called DAX. And then you can also tell a story by creating very beautiful, insightful reports, which your users will probably use for decision making. All this is in this video with files available so you can download and practice step by step. So if you're new to this area, this video is going to give you a very good foundation. So please join me and let's start the process. So this is our final work we hope to produce at the end of this video. It's a simple sales Power BI report. Every Power BI report should have a story. You should just not be interested in splashing charts or visuals around. The goal is to give your users some insights to make decisions. So here we have a comparison of actual revenue and budgeted revenue. So this visual is helping us compare. We have same for cost and then we have same for profit. Now you observe that I have a year switch here, so I can switch between 2018 and 2019. It also shows the variance, whether we're able to achieve the budget or not. In the event we're able to achieve, the numbers will turn green if it happened. You see that later when we choose some of the regions. Now, apart from being able to compare the actual and budget numbers, based on the location that I select, I'm also able to see the top customer and the top product, right? So this is very useful when you want to focus your resources on some product lines or some particular kind of customers, right? So again, this filters based on the location that I select. You also notice that there's a profit margin indicator. So for this profit margin indicator, for the location that we're able to meet the profit margin threshold of 25%, this always shows green when we select. If a particular location was not able to meet that threshold, as in this case for the Volta region in 2019, the profit margin is 18.18%. The profit margin is 18.18%, and you realize that it shows red. Okay, so these are very subtle indicators that you can put in to help your users make decisions, right? So for all of these locations, we're able to see these indicators: the top customer, the top product, the profit margin. Now let's concentrate on the branches or our locations. Now you'll notice that when I select these bars, there are some arrows here that allow me to do what we call drill down and drill through. So as an example, if I activate this and I want to see the branches, let's say within a larger area of the northern region, I can actually zoom in. Okay, so these are the branches in the northern region: Bimbilla, Tamale, and Yendi. I get the opportunity to actually see their numbers as well. So this is Bimbilla, this is Tamale, and then this is Yendi, right? So that is the option that you have, the option to drill down. I can drill up to get back my original branches. Okay, I can also go all the way down to look at, if you like, the cities or towns. Okay, that is also possible. Now, apart from drilling down, you can also drill through. So let me explain what drill through means. So here, even though you are seeing some revenue lines and cost indicators here, you want to be sure which product or which customers are driving this so that you can focus, right? So here I can right click, okay, and then I see the option to drill through, and here I want to see the drivers tab or drivers page. So when I click on this, it takes me to a page dedicated to just seeing the top revenue products, the bottom or lowest revenue products, same for top spending customers and lowest spending customers for the particular region. So again, it is supposed to be a decision making tool. So I'm able to see for our revenue line, Samsung Ultra HD Smart, this is just for the northern region. The products that are not doing well in that particular year are also here. Okay, and then on the right, you have your top spending customers, top 3 and bottom 3 as well. I've selected the northern region as indicated here. I can always go back with this navigation. Okay, so I'm back to my first page, right? If you don't want to use these bars to navigate, you could also select a particular region, let's say the Greater Accra region, and then once it's selected, I can use this globe icon, control click, and then again, it takes me to this page where if I'm doing a presentation, I can show the top revenue products, the top spending customers for the Greater Accra region, right? So it's a pretty simple Power BI report. There's a lot in here if you're a beginner, and we are going to break this down right from installation all the way to the final visual you see on your screen. So please come with me and let's start the process. Okay, so before we begin, it will be easier for you if we go through the steps we are going to use to accomplish this task. A typical Power BI report starts with data. So data can be stored in the cloud, your OneDrive, SharePoint servers. Okay, you can also have it on your local file in the Excel CSV format. You can have it in folders. You can have it in SQL servers and all that. Right? There are even custom connectors that you can connect from. All these are possible in Power BI. Now, typically, once the data is identified, you go through 5 steps. I mean, this is not cast in stone, but typically these are the steps that you will go through. The first step is to extract, transform, and load the data you're going to be working with. We call this the ETL stage. Okay, so we are going to use a tool in Power BI called Power Query. So Power Query will do the job of connecting to the data source. It maintains that connection, and then it keeps updating it. So if you add data to the source, Power Query will take it, run the steps that you use to transform it again in memory, and then you can load it and analyze. So that's the first step we are going to go through. Then sometimes you may be dealing with more than one table in your analysis. Okay, so in this case study, we have a table of transactions, a table with budgets, and then we have some category tables for customer names, location names, and all that. It will be easier if you connect all these tables, okay, so that we have one source for all our analysis. We call this data modeling, right? So in Power BI, we are going to use this feature to connect all the various tables that we have to work with using common relationships. That's the second step. Once we are done, we will now concentrate on our calculations. So you need to calculate total sales actual to compare with budgeted sales, our revenue, our cost, our profits, and all the profit margin calculations and the things that will be insightful to your users. You have to calculate them. If you're comfortable with Excel structured reference formulas, then this part is very easy for you. They are very similar to Excel formulas. We use a group of functions we call DAX, data analysis expressions. Okay, so we use DAX to create all our simple calculations, and then this will offer us an ability to analyze. Once we are done, based on the story that we want to communicate, we'll now create our visual, right? We'll use the report feature in Power BI to be able to create this. Now, all these steps can be achieved using Power BI Desktop, which is available for free for all users. So we'll go through the steps to install this, right? So if you are a free user, you can go through all this. Now, the part where you need a license is where you publish. Okay, so when you publish your work, you are publishing to their service or the online platform. Okay, so we have the Power BI service. The advantage with publishing to Power BI service is that you get the opportunity to collaborate with your colleagues or your supervisors who are also licensed to use the same domain or platform. You don't have to send emails back and forth of the same report. They can collaborate and share with you almost in real time. You also get the opportunity to embed your reports in PowerPoint or Power Apps. Okay, there are options to embed what you have done in some of these tools and platforms so that it's easy for you to share and integrate certain aspects of your report. Then ultimately, you also have the opportunity to share your final work online, generate a link that even those who don't have Power BI license can just view the web version, interact with it, and all that. So for this case study, we are going to be concentrating on the first four, which is how to use the Power BI desktop, and then later we'll concentrate on how to take advantage of the Power BI service. So these are the steps that we are going to go through. Now let's go ahead and then go through the installation. If you are a Windows user, you can get Power BI desktop installed directly in Microsoft Store. So you just have to go to Microsoft Store, search for Power BI desktop, and you see the option to install it, right? I already have it installed, so I have to just open it. So that's how you go about it. It takes a while, and you should have it set and ready to use. So if you're a Mac user, the Power BI desktop version is not available yet for direct installation. I know there's a workaround to install the Windows environment on your Mac using proprietary software so that you can actually install the Power BI desktop. That is if you have to use it. But otherwise, that is how you go about installing the Power BI desktop. So now that we have this installed, let's open it and then have a quick overview of what is in there. So once you're done with the installation and you launch your Power BI desktop, this is your typical welcome screen. So this is just a screen that you can close, right? And you now see the default page, which is the report view. Okay, so you don't really need to sign in, but I have signed in because I have a licensed version, but you can use it without signing in. So the appearance is similar to what you see in typical Microsoft Office applications. So we have your home, insert, modeling, view, optimize, help, right? So under home, you have the options to get data, right? Now I explained that the process starts with getting data, so you cannot really miss the option to bring in data. You can find it under home. You can also connect to data using any of these tabs, right? So all these options allow you to bring in data. When it comes to getting data, as I mentioned, there are various data sources. So I can get data from my Excel workbook, from Power BI semantic models, data flows, SQL Server. There's a chance that if you go to the more option, if you have a custom CRM or ERP software, there will be something there to help you connect to your custom software, right? So that's what we have under home. Now, depending on your version, now I say version because the Power BI team has been consistently updating the software in the last few years. So normally if your charts or your visuals are not showing under the home, then you need to go and then update the current version that you have so that at least you can easily come along with this case study. So to do that, let's quickly go through the step. If you don't have the charts up here, you may likely have it to the right, okay, which is okay. So please go to File, okay, then you go to Options and Settings, and then you go to Options. So now when you come to Options, you go to Preview Features, right? This is a special page where you see new features that the team has added, right? So what actually changed the appearance of the Power BI desktop from what we are been using all these years is this new feature called on object interaction, right? So if this is not checked, please check it. Okay, so once you check it, it will prompt you to save your work and then reopen your file. I mean, you have not really saved it, so you can just confirm and then reopen the file. Now, the expectation is that once you reopen the file, this should be the new appearance, right? Now, the preview features is where new features are tested before they are added to the mainstream. So hopefully in the future, this should not be something you should check, but it should appear normally, right? So to get all of us at the same level, this is the view that we are working with. So under home, you have your charts. We'll be using all these charts to create our reports. Okay, the usual Excel charts are here plus extra charts. You can even have custom our Python charts from here and also get more visuals from the store, right? Then for inserts, we use this to again bring in our charts. You can also embed some buttons and shapes, okay, to help us with navigation and all that, right? There are also some custom visuals here. Then for modeling, this is where we'll be doing a lot of our calculations, okay? And then you have some view options to set your themes, your page view and all that, to also engage some of the panels, okay? Then there's the option to check the performance of your reports, that is also here, and then the default help option, right? So these tabs are pretty straightforward. But if you look to your left, you realize that there are at least 3 tabs here. We'll be using this. So this is the report view. This is where you create your final report. This is the table view. This is where all your tables that you load after your transformation will sit. This is the model view. So in the model view, you see where the tables are connected, right? In the recent version, they've just added the DAX query view, which allows you to create your DAX queries and edit them as well, right? It will be easier if I show you how it looks in the completed version. So let's shift to the completed version and appreciate the use of these various views. So in the report view, as I mentioned, this is where you create your charts. Okay, so the view looks like this. Now you can have many pages, okay, of your report, and then use navigation to switch in between the pages. When I come to the table view, okay, in the table view, this is where I see my data, right? So all the tables that I transformed and brought in are here. You don't really have to go back to your source to see what each table contains. You can always have them here, right? So that is the table view. Okay, then the model view is where you see how the tables were connected, the process of data modeling. Okay, we'll talk about this very soon. So here it gives you a schema or a visual of how the tables are connected and the relationship that exists in the model. Okay, so as I said, this is an option. The team just added this recently to help you create your DAX functions or formulas and then edit them, right? You don't need to actually activate this. This is a recent addition. We can do without it, but at least these 3 icons should be present to represent the different views. Now you realize that in each view, you have the option to see at least one pane. Okay, so this is the filters pane. Okay, there's also the data pane that actually shows you an icon representing all your measures and your tables. Okay, so always look to the right to either expand or collapse these panes, right? So this is an overview and this is how we are going to be working. Now we are going to start with the data. We'll bring in the data and then we'll start some real action shortly. So here's the data we are going to work with. This is available, the download link in the YouTube video description. So please click on it and come along. As a data analyst, when you receive data, please take your time, understand what is in each data set or table to help you actually come up with insightful KPIs or indicators for your end user. So this is a sales report. We have one tab for transactions, the order ID, the order date, delivery date, okay, the customer ID, the city was ordered from, the unit cost, quantity, selling price, and discount. So all these represent the order for a single transaction, right? It goes all the way down. Then we have our customers page. So this is a unique list of all our customers. Pay attention that every customer here appears once with their respective customer ID and their customer segment. So this is the customers data. Then we also have data on our various locations. So using the cities as a primary field, we have for each city, the country, and the region that they are in. Okay. And then we also have a page for our products. So this page actually shows us all the products that we have with their product IDs, category, subcategory, and product name. And then the last two tabs, we have our budget revenue and our budget cost. Similar structure, but one has revenue numbers and the other has budget cost numbers, right? So for a new user, you need to actually connect the story that binds all these data sets. What can we calculate? What is the user looking for? Okay. To make it easier for you, we need to know what are our fact tables and what our dimension tables are. So let me break this down for you in this simple schema. So there's nothing wrong analyzing data from one big table, but in a typical ERP or CRM software or your SQL servers, you have different tables playing different roles. So in this case study, we realize that we have two tables, right? Now, what these tables have, or the key feature in these tables, is that they store quantitative data on the activity of the business or events for analysis. So case in point is the transactions table that you saw. It records our daily sales or orders, right? That is a typical fact table. Now, from fact tables, you are able to create what we call calculations or measures, right? So in our case study, the tables that are fact tables are the transactions table and the budget table. One, they contain quantitative data which we can aggregate or create calculations from, and then they record data on a recurring basis. So for transactions, we record it on a daily basis. Budgeting, we do it annually or monthly dependent. But as long as these tables contain quantitative data and then they record activities that are on a recurring basis, we classify them as fact tables, right? Now, fact tables allow us to calculate, example, total sales, which we can compare with budgeted sales, okay? So that is our fact table. You need to understand this first. Now, if you calculate just sales or budgeted sales, these are just measures, black and white numbers. They don't really communicate anything without context, right? What will be helpful is to give your user sales broken down, let's say by product, sales broken down by customer, top 5, bottom 5 customer, which branch is doing well, which branch is not doing well, how are we doing year on year, to be able to compare previous and actual performance. All these are possible when we use dimension tables, right? So what are dimension tables? They provide, if you like, descriptive attributes or context and help us break down or filter our calculations. So when you calculate your numbers from your fact table, typical questions that will come up when you're doing your presentation is who bought from us, where, which branch was doing well. So these are typical questions. What was bought, which product is doing well, when did we do better this year compared to last year, right? In the case study that we have, in a typical work environment, you have tables that offer you details or context for your calculations, right? So example, in our data sets, you saw that we had a register for customers, we had a register for location, we had a register for products, and then for when we'll be calculating or creating what we call a calendar table, which will provide details on our dates, right? These tables are what we call dimension tables, okay? They help us actually break down our calculations or filter so that in the end, the user is not just left with black and white numbers like total sales without context or budgeted sales without context. We'll be able to filter or break down what we have done with visuals and charts and then help our user to get an understanding on what works and what doesn't work and what has to be tuned and all that, right? So it is important you actually appreciate the dimension tables that help us break down our calculations. In fact, it's this same schema that we are going to be using to create our data model. You also notice that once we create our data models, we'll be connecting our dimension tables to our fact tables, and we'll be using common columns. So as an example, between the transactions table and our customers table, there will be one common column that will connect these two, which is the customer ID. For location, that will be city. For product, that will be product ID, right? And then we have order date and delivery date connecting dates. It is important to understand this so that when we start our work in Power BI, you know where we are heading with our connections. Let's now get into action. So please open your Power BI desktop, and as I mentioned, we have to get data. This data sits in an Excel workbook. So we'll go straight to the Excel workbook, and my Excel file sits here. So you just double click and open your Excel file. So this is the ETL process. So it gets the data. The first thing you're going to see is a navigator. This allows you to preview the different data sets that are coming in. Now, these are the worksheets that were in the workbook. So as you recall, arranged in alphabetical order. We have budget cost. You can click and preview to the right. Budget revenue, customers, location, product, and transactions actual. Right. So I'm going to commit all these. Okay. So I'll hold Shift and then select the last one, or you can pick them one after the other. Right. So this means I'm bringing everything into Power Query. Now we've done the extraction part. Let's transform. So even though you have your load button active, please skip it and go to transform, because we need to see what is in the data first, transform it before we load. Right. So you click on transform data, and here it opens up the Power Query editor. So as I mentioned earlier, this is the Power Query editor. This is where we will be transforming, making changes to the data that has been brought in. Now remember, whatever you are doing here is going to be recorded or stored in memory. The assumption is that we work on a monthly, or let's say on a weekly schedule. The data comes in this shape every time. You don't want to go through this process every time. So whatever changes you do here, maybe delete some columns, merge some, remove some characters, Power Query is able to store all these steps. So if your original data source gets any updates, or there are any changes in the data source, on refresh, these steps are played like a typical macro in Excel. You don't have to worry about it again. Okay, and then the changes reflect directly in your final work in Power BI. So that's how Power Query works. Now, let's just walk through how the interface is. So you have home, transform, add column, right? And then view. These four tabs are the main tabs, okay? There are optional helper tabs like the tools tab for diagnostics, and then the help, right? Now, look at it this way. Under every tab, any icon you see there can ship your data or add some feature or remove some feature to it to give you what you want in your final analysis. So as an example, I can remove columns, right? I can remove rows, I can split column, I can group. All these are available under my home tab. When you get data for the first time, it will be helpful to actually view the different queries. So the queries you see on my left are the different tabs or data sets that we brought in, right? So this is my queries pane. When I click, I get a preview of how the data looks like. Now, to my right are the properties or the query settings. So for each query or the active query, I can rename and then also see the steps that have been applied to the query up to this point, right? Every step is recorded once over here. Some steps are done automatically, and some are recorded as you do it manually. Very, very easy. You don't have to really write any code. Just click and play if you know what you are looking for, right? So let's go through some basic transformations. Now, I want to go to the View tab, right? Usually in the View tab, if you have selected any active query, it allows you to preview the data that you have. So currently I have 3 columns, 23 rows, right? Just by checking column distribution, I will see how many unique entries I have here. Okay, I can also see column profile showing me the different entries in there. All these are things you can check. Okay, there's also column quality to see whether there are errors in your data set or not. Okay, but beyond the view, one important thing is to look at your data sets by column or by field, right? This looks like Excel, but we don't actually do cell business here. Everything here is looked at in the columnar view, right? So if I take the budget cost, you notice that it's actually set to column 1, column 2, column 3 as headers. This shouldn't be, right? In the original data set, city should be the header, 2018 should be up here, and 2019 should be up there. So this is a typical transformation case. The data didn't appear the way we wanted, so we have to transform. So our first transformation is to come to home, and then you see use first row as headers, right? So you see that I can click on this, and then just like that, it just pushes up my row and then makes it a header, right? That step has been recorded here as promoted headers. You can see it recorded here, right? Earlier, there were 3 steps that were executed on our behalf. When we loaded the data, it recorded the source, we saw the navigation, okay, and then you see this change type. Now, what this change type does is that it profiles the content of the column and then gives it a format, whether it is a text, a number, a percentage, or a decimal. Now, it's very important that in your Power Query transformations, you always ensure that your data sets or the columns in your data sets have a particular format. So if your data set or the columns are not formatted, you see that the icon in the top left has ABC123. It's a mix. It means it hasn't committed it to a format yet, right? If you click on this, you notice the different formats that you can actually commit your column to or your data to, right? So sometimes it profiles it and then does it for you automatically. So when it does that, you see this automatic change type step. The promoted headers is what we just did. Now, because the data has been reconfigured, it ran the change type again, right? And that's what gave us the ABC for city, which is text, 123 for 2018, because these are values, and then 2019, we also have values here. I'm walking you through this so that you appreciate how we'll do it for the rest of the steps, right? So that is for budget cost. Similar for budget revenue. So again, we demoted the header and then made it a record. So the same thing, we use first row as headers, push this up. The step is recorded for this. We'll go through quickly for the rest of the queries here. So this one has the same problem. Sometimes because the data was not captured as a table, right, you have challenges like this, but it's okay to use first row as headers to correct this as quickly as possible. Same for location. So we use first row as headers, and then we have product. We'll use the first row as headers, right? Now you notice that when it comes to transactions actual, it actually got it right. It's IntelliSense, so sometimes it gets it right, sometimes it doesn't get it right. But just make sure that your columns are committed to the right data type. So that is our first transformation. If you did that correctly, well done. Now let's proceed to the next transformation we are going to do to our data set. As I mentioned, if you remember from the schema where we separated our tables into fact tables and dimension tables, you realize that our actual table had to connect to our customers register, because if I create calculations in my actual, which we call the sales, all I have here is a customer ID, right? You notice that in here. So customer ID 401. Unfortunately, in the sales records table, I don't have the name of the customer. To be able to get the name of the customer, I need to connect it to the customer's register, right? In the customer's register, the customer ID is here, customer ID 401. The name is Selam Ado, and then the segment is consumer. To be able to know these customers, the customer table and the transactions actual fact table has to be connected. But here we have a problem. You realize that the customer ID here, which is just 401, is not the same as the customer ID here. This one has a prefix CUSTID -space 401. We will not be able to connect these tables directly if we don't fix this, right? So here is a typical case study to correct the customer IDs, right? So we'll learn how to do that. It's like a lookup. If the lookup values are not the same, you cannot match the tables. Okay, so to correct this, we are going to do it in two ways. It's the same problem with products, but for the customer ID, let's do it this way. First, let's get rid of the idle space. Okay, you see that there's an idle space just before the numbers, right? So typically, if you want to format any content of a column, you could just right click. Some of the popular transformation tools are here. Okay, so remove duplicates, remove errors, change type. So you have transform, right? There's also replace values, right? So here I'm doing it on this particular column I have selected. So let's click on replace values, right? Typically that's how Power Query works. You get a dialog box, you fill in, you commit, and then you go. So the value to find is a space. So please type space or click the space bar. Space is a character, and I'm replacing it with nothing, right? So I'm not typing anything here. I'll click OK. So when I do that, you realize that now the spaces are no more there. The step has been recorded. It means that if I get recent data, this step will be executed for me automatically, right? So that is my customer ID fixed. Now our goal is to make the customer ID in the transaction actual the same. So if you come to this customer ID, we need to first add the prefix, okay? And then you also notice that some of the numbers have lost the leading values. So as an example, 030 here has been captured as 30 because these have been profiled as numbers. Okay, so as whole numbers, the leading zeros are knocked off. So we can fix this with Power Query. So what we are going to do is we are going to use a very popular feature in Power Query called column from examples. Now, if you are conversant with Excel's flash fill, then this is very similar. So basically, we are going to give Power Query how we think the column should look like or the content should look like, and then it would use the pattern that we have created to generate what is expected, right? So I have highlighted customer ID in the transactions actual, right? I'll come to add column, and you see column from examples here, right? So because I've highlighted only one column, I'm going to choose from selection. So I'll choose from selection. And when you click on it, you see that an idle column has been created to the far left of your query, right? Now this is titled column 1. These spaces are editable. You can type what is required or what is expected for each record, right? So I'm standing against 401. If you don't have the customer ID in view, you can use the slider at the bottom, okay, to position the customer ID close to your idle column. So I'm standing here, so this should be reading 401. I'll press enter. Now you realize that the moment I press enter, it already starts the pattern, right? Now it will be helpful if you go straight to the outlier. So in this case, this is the record we want to fix, the 30. We want it to read 030, right? So when I do that, you notice that it now corrects the 96 and makes it 090. Okay, so once it detects the kind of pattern that you are looking at, it generates it for you to preview. If it's okay, you click on OK. Now, another thing that will be happening is that as it generates the pattern, it will be writing the custom code or formula that you could use to also get this done directly, right? We call this the M code. That is a native language in Power Query. So if you're okay with this, you can now commit it by clicking OK. Right. So you should now have a column called custom. Okay, that now has the 3 numbers with a leading 0. That's one of 2 problems solved. The next thing we are going to do is to now add a prefix. Now that prefix should be the same as the prefix we had in the customer ID. Power Query is case sensitive, so in terms of characters, please ensure that you are using the right case every time. Right, so this is CUST capital ID dash. That's what we are going to use as prefix. Right, so again, for any step that you think of, most likely there's a feature or icon up there in the tabs that can help you achieve this. So let's go to transform. Okay, and you see format here. Okay, so under format in the transform, there's the option to add a prefix and then also a suffix as well. Now you notice that some of the tools or the features or icons here can be found in the add column tab as well. Right, so here under transform, I see format. All these options are here under transform. Right, and then under add column, you see the same format icon. All these options are there. Now it's important you understand the difference. If I do an action under transform, what's going to happen is that the result will replace the current column, right? So this column will be updated with a result. So the new prefix will be added right in this column. But if I do it under the add column, right, the result is going to be a new column. Okay, so it's going to actually let the old column remain and then go ahead and create a new column with the result I'm looking at. Right, you see it in action very soon, but please take note of the difference. So don't just jump at any icon. Know which tab you are operating from. So I am under the transform tab. I've selected the custom column. What I want to do is to add a prefix. So I'll come to transform. I'll come to add a prefix. Right, now the value here is CUST, right, in proper case, then uppercase ID dash. Right, it's important that you type this correctly, otherwise there will be a mismatch between the lookup values. Right, there's no space after the dash. So if I click OK now, right, as expected, I have transformed the column to add a prefix to all the entries that are in here. The step has also been added. So now my lookup values are the same. Okay, so customer ID 401, if I come here, you see customer ID 401, allowing me to now connect these 2 columns in the data model. Right, now we have to get rid of the old customer ID, this one here. Okay, unlike Excel columns, even though we actually generated the new customer ID column from the old one, when we remove this column, it's not going to leave an error, okay, because the steps are actually cumulative. It shows you your data as at your last action. Okay, so we can now right click this and remove this. That step has been added. Okay, so we now have the new customer ID column, which you can now double click. So double click on the header and you name this customer ID. Okay, you can position this if you like, drag and reposition, but actually the position will not matter as long as we have the column present. That should be fine. Okay, so that is one of the transformations that has been done. All the steps have been recorded so that you don't have to do this every time. Let's go to the products query. It's a similar problem. Product ID here has a prefix prod ID dash, and then the numbers continue. If you look at the actual table, right, you notice that the product ID that we had here doesn't have the prefix. Some of these things happen in real life because of the configuration of the systems. Okay, but that's where Power Query becomes useful. You can use it to fix all these. So here we could do the same prefix method. But to give you more examples on how you can use the features in Power Query, we'll use a different method. What is important is that the contents of the columns are the same. So we are going to learn how to, this time around, knock off the prefix. Okay, so what we want to do is to knock off prod ID dash, right, by extracting just the numbers after the dash. Thankfully, the dash, which we call delimiter, is consistent. So with just a simple transformation to extract the numbers after this delimiter, we'll get all our product IDs, assuming that they have the same text length, right? So select the product ID. This time around, I'm going to extract. Notice that I'm working under transform, right? So I'm going to extract text after a delimiter. There are various options here, but we are choosing this one because of the position of the dash. So I'll click on this, right? So by now you realize that any icon or feature that you choose, there's a very easy dialog box for you to fill in. Now the delimiter we are using here is a dash. Okay, so I'll just put in the dash and I'll click OK. As expected, it has now extracted all the numbers after the dash. The step has been included in my applied steps, as you can see here. Now take note that because this is an ID and it is actually not numbers we are going to aggregate, it is best if we leave it in the ABC format, which is a text format, right? Now, it's also important that you ensure the counterpart in the fact table is also formatted the same way. So over here, I'll go to the product ID, change the type. So I'll click on this change type, and then I'm going to change it to an ABC. Okay, so that step has also been added. Makes it easier to connect the two lookup values. Okay, so we've now solved two problems. We are now able to match the product ID to the product ID in the product table. We are also able to match our customer's ID to our customer's table. The truth is that in Power Query, the case study will determine the kind of transformation you will do. Okay, so I would encourage you to try your hands on a lot of case studies so that you at least can walk through most of the features that are here. The next thing we are going to do is to create one budget table. You notice that our budget table is split into two. So there's budget cost and budget revenue. Okay, we could use it as it is, but it's going to be a lot of work calculating revenue from here and then cost from a separate table. So to be able to combine these two tables, we are going to use a feature we call appending, right? In Power Query, there are two ways to combine tables. There is merging and then there's appending. For this case study and because of time, we are going to concentrate on just appending. So again, let me break this down and help you understand how appending works. So as I mentioned earlier, there are two ways to combine tables in Power Query. This case study is on appending. When do we append? So we append when we have more than one table with the same headers, right? So you realize that we had one table for budgets. That one contained numbers for revenue, but it had the same headers, CT 2018 and 2019, right? Then we also had the same structure for cost, CT 2018 and 2019. Because we have the same headers, we can now put these two tables together, right? And then create one table that has just that header, CT 2018 and 2019, but the content of the records will now come together, right? So we append when we have the same headers so that we can have one consolidated table, right? Now, in our case study, you realize that if we do it this way, we'll need something to help us differentiate which lines are revenue and which lines are cost. So to proceed with this, we'll first add a column that would tell us this is revenue, another that would tell us this is cost before we append. So that's how we are going to be doing that. Let's proceed. So back here, these are the two queries we are dealing with, budget cost and budget revenue. same headers as I mentioned. Now we are going to add a new column here, which is possible in Power Query, so that when we combine, we know which lines are cost, which lines are revenue. To do that, anytime you want a new column, most likely what you are looking for will be under add column, right? So here we've used column from examples. Let's now use custom column, right? So with custom columns, we create a new column using a custom formula. So let's click on that, right? Now the name of the column will be type. We'll maintain this for the second table as well. So we'll call this type, and we are going to create our formula, which is very simple, that every cell in that column should have cost, right? So I'll put double quote cost, double quote, right? So ensure that there are no syntax errors in your formula. Okay, so once you have this, I'll click OK. The expectation is that the type column has been added, okay, and then the entries here are all cost to help us differentiate. As I mentioned earlier, don't leave your data type as ABC123. Commit it to a particular data type, which in this case should be text, right? So we are going to repeat the same process for budget revenue. So I'm here in budget revenue. I'll come to add column, then custom column. I'll click on this. Important to ensure that the name is typed without any leading or trailing space. This time around, what is going to fill that column is the word revenue. So we'll type it in double quotes, no syntax error detected, and then we'll click OK. Right. So again, we'll commit this to text. Right. So basically what we've achieved is we have 4 columns for revenue, 4 columns for budget cost. Right. We are now going to create one consolidated table that will bring these two data sets together. We'll call that budget. To do that, we'll come to home. Okay. Now to the far right, you see the combine group, right? So we are choosing append queries. Please drop it down, and then you see append queries as new, so that our final table will be a new table separate from these two tables that we are going to use. So append queries as new. The default layout is that you can append 2 tables. There's the option to add more than that, as long as the headers are the same, right? So the first table we have here is budget revenue. The order really doesn't matter, right? The second table here is the budget cost. So we'll choose that one. So we have budget revenue, budget cost, and then we'll click OK. So as expected, we now have a new query which has city 2018, 2019, right? But you now have the 2 tables put together, revenue on top and then cost below. Okay, so this is our new budget table, but to make it easier, instead of using the name append 1, we will rename this budget and press enter. Right, so this is what we are going to be using to create our budget calculations. Now that we have our budget, let's also rename our transactions actual. Okay, so that we have an actual fact table and a budget fact table. These two are going to be our 2 fact tables. We'll create our calculations to compare our numbers from, right? Now, to avoid double count or double calculations, we really will not need these 2 queries anymore. So what we are going to do is to disable the load, right? So what it means is if I right click this and uncheck enable load, when I commit all the queries for further analysis, these 2 tables will not come along, right? So I've deactivated budget cost. You see the label has been italicized. I'll do same for this, disable load for this one, right? So the data in these 2 tables will be represented by this one. That's how can we disable that. Okay, so we have our appended budget table now. What we are going to do is to do a little transformation on this table. Now, when you're analyzing data, it is important to have your values, okay, and your attributes in distinct columns. Let me explain. So you realize that there are numbers for 2018 and 2019 here. Then we have a column for type showing us revenue or cost, and then we have city. If we have all the numbers in one column, there are three ways we can break it down. We can break it down by city, we can break it down by type, or we can break it down by year, right? To make it easier, it would be good to have year sit in a distinct column. Okay, it makes it easier for your pivot table summaries or your charts or your calculations. So 2018 and 2019 should not be sitting here as headers, but they should be collapsed into a distinct column called date or year, right? So that with our values in one column, we should have the option to break down by city, by year or date, and by the type of budget, right? So to collapse these two columns into one column called date or year, we are going to use a process called unpivoting. So unpivoting basically means that I have columns and then I'm turning it into rows. It's not the same as transposing, okay? Because when we unpivot, the numbers are aligned with the respective attributes. Okay, so you have a longer layout rather than just the same set of data turned the other way around. So we are unpivoting to collapse these columns into rows. So to do that, please highlight these two columns. So you select 2018 first, shift right to select 2019, ensure that these two columns are highlighted, then you right click. Okay, so when you right click, there's the option to unpivot the selected columns, this first one, right? So you click on that. Okay, so when you click on that, you now see that all your values are now in a dedicated column. Okay, you have your attribute, which is year, also in a separate column, right? So this time your values are here. You can break down by city, type, and attribute nicely. Now, to make it easier for this to connect to our fact table, we are going to change the attribute from year to a date, a direct date. So please click on the data type ABC and then change this to this date, right? So you click on this date and then you have the first day of the year as the date for the budget, which is fine. So there are only two entries here, which will now correspond to our calendar date, which we are going to create very soon, right? So city, type. Now let's give it a proper name. So instead of attributes, let's call this date, all right? And then for the value, we'll call this amount. Okay, so we now have a complete budget table. Okay, we also have our complete actual, right? And then we have our dimension tables, customers, location, and product, right? Now, what is obviously missing is a dedicated table for dates. Why is this important? Because we need to be able to analyze our calculations by date. Somebody would ask, why can't we use the dates in here, order date and delivery date? Now, you realize that for these order dates, there are gaps in here. Not every date is represented. Okay, so if you have, let's say, 1st January 2018 in your budget and you are referencing this as your date column, there will be a problem because it doesn't actually have dates for all the tables or all the data sets in your query. That's one. Two, you also need a dedicated calendar table because we want one that will automatically update when new entries are added to our transaction. So currently this one starts on the 6th and probably ends somewhere in 2019. But the calendar table automatically expands to include new dates. Okay, so our goal is now to create this calendar table that would ensure that we actually have the correct timeline starting from our budget and then ending when the latest order actually happened in our query. So that is our next target, to create the calendar table. Okay, so before we create our calendar table, let's actually break down the advantages of a calendar table. It's a dedicated table that allows you to create your visuals or your charts by date attributes. So i.e., you can do a breakdown by month, you can compare 2 years, you can do year-to-date calculations, right? All these columns should be sitting in a dedicated table, and that is what we call a calendar table. So the first reason is that in a calendar table, we create a continuous sequence of dates, right? Because we want to create calculations that compare periods, so current year versus previous year. We want to calculate year-to-date calculations. And when you're creating these calculations, you don't want to skip dates, okay? So the fact that you have every date present from your starts to the end period in your transactions period is very important, right? So to help these functions calculate correctly, you need a calendar table, right? Now, the second one is that you need to maintain a continuous time axis in your visualization. So take an example that maybe there was a period you didn't sell. So July, August, your shop was closed. With a calendar table, that gap should be shown, okay, so that we know that there was a period that had no activity. The calendar table will show that. But if you don't have a calendar table, you'll probably jump from May to August and will not really appreciate what happened during that gap, right? So when you create a visual and you created it from a calendar table, it helps maintain a continuous time axis. Without it, you may have misleading interpretations, right? And most importantly, a calendar table is flexible enough. You'll see it shortly when we create it in Power Query. So depending on the kind of report you want to create and what your users are interested in, you can throw in special date attributes to help you calculate or analyze your data or create visuals. So in a calendar table, we can adjust our fiscal quarters. If there are holidays, there are special week numbers, we'll adjust them from one source and use them consistently across all the reports. So it helps to have, if you like, one headquarters for everything date analysis, right? So that you can actually create accurate interpretations of your calculations. So now that we have this at the back of our heads, let's go in and learn how to create a calendar table. So we are going to use a custom formula, right? So all this while you've been clicking and Power Query has been executing the steps for you, but you probably didn't pay attention to the fact that there's a formula bar that actually records all the codes that are being used. In truth, you don't really have to create this from scratch, but in rare occasions like this one, you may have to actually create the formula yourself. This method is preferred because in Power Query, you can actually manipulate the calendar table. But there are other methods where you can create a calendar table using DAX in the data model, right? But for this case study, let's create it directly. So to create a new query or a blank query, you can just right click into this pane. Okay, you see the option of a new query here, and then you choose blank query, right? So a new query is going to be created on standby. Now, this is where we are going to type our formula, a very simple formula. The formula basically is saying that stamp a start date. The start date is when in our data sets the first activity began, right? So if you look closely, that first activity started when we budgeted, right? So I'm just stepping out, it will give us an error, but don't worry, you can stay, and then I just want to show you something. So if I come to budget, you realize that this is the first date anything happened in this transaction. So 1st January 2018 is the first date for any activity, right? So we are going to start from here and then add a sequence of dates or a series of dates daily. So from 1st January, you go to 2nd, 3rd, and all that up to the latest activity in our transactions, which guess what happened on the last delivery date. Okay, so our start point is the budget, and then our end point is the last date in the delivery date. Now, when we do it this way and your data updates, okay, so currently it probably ends on the 31st of December 2019, right? If you add 2020 data, this delivery date will push back, right? And that will be enabled because of the formula we are going to use to create our calendar table. So start date, add daily date all the way to the end date. That is the core structure of our formula. So let's proceed and then write our formula. So I'm back here, equal to, now I'm going to zoom in to make it easier for you to follow. So here, so number dot from, so please type it case sensitive. So number dot from returns a number value from a given value. So basically it's just stamping a date for us. Okay, so number dot from. Now to get that date, that start date, we need to go to a column, right, to bring the minimum date in that column. So we use a function called list.min. Okay, so list.min, right, and then we open our bracket, right. So when you open your bracket, just delete the trailing closing bracket. So list.min, now we need that column. That column sits in the table. The table is budget, right? So budget is a table, square bracket to go into the columns. Okay, so budget square bracket, and then the column name is date. Okay, then I'll close my square bracket. So basically it's going into the budget table, scans the dates column, and then returns the minimum date, which is the first activity, right? So you close your brackets for list.min and you close your brackets for number.from. This is the formula we are going to use. So we just copy this. So this is basically stamping the start date. So Control C, right? Now it's a range or series of dates we are creating. So I'll bring 2 dots here, okay, for the series of dates, and then paste what I just copied, right? So I have this here, number.from, the same thing, but because I want the end date, I need to make some adjustment to what I pasted. So instead of list.min, I'm going to use list.max, right, to fetch the latest date. Now the latest date is not going to come from budget, it's rather going to come from the actual table. So actual, that's the name of the table, and the column name is delivery date, right? So please ensure that the case is correctly captured, right? So basically what I've done is that I am starting with number.from to stamp the start date, 2 dots for the series, and then it's going to end in the maximum date from delivery date. Okay, so that is the core formula. Now because we want a list, we'll come and step right after the equal sign and then put in a curly bracket, right? And then you step after the closing bracket and then put in a curly bracket as well, right? So let's go over it. Equal to curly bracket number.from, open bracket list.min, open bracket budget, square bracket date, close square bracket, close normal bracket, close normal bracket, 2 dots for the series. Then we paste number.from, open bracket list.max, open bracket, actual is the transaction table, and then we go to the delivery dates, which is when things are delivered, right? Close square bracket, close normal bracket, close normal bracket, we close with a curly bracket. So if your formula is correct and you press enter, let's see what we get. So I'm going to exit the magnifier. So this is what we have, right? So we have a list. Now, if you come from an Excel background, you know that dates are numbers. So these numbers you see there are actually dates. So it's a list. We are going to convert to a table. So we'll click to table. Okay, just go ahead and click OK. No changes here, right? So this is our first column. Now let's change the format here to a proper date. Okay, so you realize that it starts from 1st January 2018, goes all the way down to the latest transaction date, which is 31st December 2019. Well, you don't really have to scroll through, but just to show you how it works. Okay, so this is our current timeline for our calendar table. From here, we can now draw the specific date attributes that we need for analysis, right? So let's call this primary column date. Okay, and we now draw our attributes. So if you need year in your analysis, you can select this primary column, go to add column, right? Remember, add column gives us new columns. Then we look for this date icon. Then there's year. So year will drop the year attributes for, we have 2018 and 2019 here, which you can use for our slicer later. You select the primary column again, come to date, okay, and then this time around we extract month, right? Now notice that this month actually gives us month values from 1 to 12, 1 for January, 12 for December. It's useful to sort our calendar table later, right? Then let's draw the actual month name. So we come back to the primary column, date icon, month here, then we choose name of month, right? So this is what we are going to be using if we want to create visuals or charts broken down by month. Now, if I want to abbreviate or shorten the month name, so I need to add a step that would, if you like, extract just the first characters, right? So can you walk through and then see which tool or feature can help us do this? Now, because we don't want to create a new column, it will be useful to go to the transform tab, right? So over here, you see the option to extract first characters, right? So I'll choose first characters, first 3 characters, and then I'll click OK, right? So because I did it under transform, then I have a step added that extracted the first 3 characters. The last thing we're going to do here is to name our query calendar, right? That's actually a regular name we give for the calendar table. You can name it date table or whatever name will make you know the content, right? So with this added, we now have our complete set of dimension tables. Remember, dimension tables give us context, right? So we can now break down our calculations from actual and budget by date, by product, by location, and by customers, right? These two are not going to be loaded. So we finished the extract and transformation part. Now let's conclude by loading all our queries, transformed queries, into Power BI. Okay, so that's the loading part. So here I can click, close, and apply. So it would apply and load directly. The other options here, if you have to stop midway and come back. So let's close and apply. So this will now load all that we've done. Okay, we can always go back into Power Query and make changes, but this completes your ETL. And once it loads our completed queries, we'll now proceed and go to the data model. So as you can see, all my queries are now in the data pane to my right. Okay, so we are going to be using this to create our visuals and calculations. But before we proceed, we need to connect them using the data model. It will be good at this point to save your work. Okay, so you know, all this while we are using an untitled Power BI desktop. Now, when you save your Power BI file, it behaves like any normal Office file. You can save it in a folder, open it, and then continue your work, right? So let's name this Getting Started with Power BI. Right, so I've saved it, I've noted this folder I'm in, and then right. So once it's saved, we can now continue the process and go to the second step of data modeling. Okay, so we are done with the loading, and after loading, you should see the different tables to the right. So just to help you appreciate, we are currently in the default view. You know, we just left Power Query, right? If you open your Power BI workbook or file, right? This is the default view. If you want to go back to Power Query, you can use the transform data. Okay, the transform data icon will bring you back to Power Query, and then you can make any changes that you probably may have left out, right? Then after, you can close the Power Query editor, and this is your default layout or appearance, right? Now, as I mentioned, there are some views to the left. So we are in the report view. We haven't created any visuals yet. This is the table view. This is where we see in detail the tables or the data that we just loaded. So all of them are here. Now, our next task is to create the model, right? Or create our data model. And that is in the third view. That's the model view. So come to the model view. Now, if you come here, you probably see that these panes are already opened. You can always fold them. Okay, so you can collapse them. You have more space, right? So this is your view. You have some cards here. You have some lines, but don't worry. We are going to learn how to connect these from scratch and then make sense of the data model. So what you could probably do is that in the zoom slider to your bottom right, okay, you can reduce the zoom level, or there's a fit to page icon in the bottom right corner. So when you click on the fit to page icon, you should see all your cards in view, right? So this is currently set to 61% zoom. You can also manually do that. Okay, so what do these cards represent? Essentially, these are cards that represent each table in your data sets, right? So you have some lines already here. This is like a default behavior because Power BI has detected that there are some common columns between some of the tables. It has gone ahead to connect these columns, right? But to help your learning, what we are going to do here is to delete all the lines. So right click every line and delete. Okay, and then we'll start from scratch so that you understand why these lines are created and some of the labels, what do they represent, the arrows and all those things. So right click and delete every line, and then we'll start from scratch. Okay, so these cards are movable, right? So if you place your cursor somewhere around the header area, you click and hold, you can move them around and position them. If you look closely, there are two tables that are very important in this model, and those are fact tables. If without the fact tables, we will not be able to do our calculations, right? So if you have a model like this, what is important is you will first look out for your fact table, or your fact tables in this case, and then position them in a very obvious position or area. So let's position actual and our budget, in this case side by side. Okay, so once we have these, we could also expand it a bit to align them. So these are our fact tables. These are where the calculations will come from. Now, usually once you've set your fact table, it may be in the middle or below. What we are trying to do here is to create a schema, right? A visual aid to help us understand how the tables are connected. So these are our fact tables. Then the rest will be our dimension tables, right? These ones, you can now align them top, or if you like, in some cases, you can surround the fact tables with the dimension tables. So now we do this arrangement to actually depict how the model works. You see, when we calculate from the fact tables, example, total sales, profit margin, budget sales, budget revenue, these calculations sit without any interaction, right? So to give your users context, you create filters from your customers table, product table, location table, and calendar table, right? Once these are connected to the fact tables, your user is now able to go down specifically and break down the calculations. So if you calculate total sales and your user is interested in sales for a particular branch, person comes here and then clicks on the city. This city that has been selected here will filter what has been calculated in the fact table, right? So we have these fact tables, if you like, in the downstream, while the dimension tables are sitting above with filters that would act on these calculations that are downstream. So if I calculate total sales and it's 5 million, until I select a filter from here, that 5 million is always going to show. But if I select a particular product or a particular region, then that calculation is going to update and then give me the value that corresponds to the selection I have activated in any of these dimension tables. So that is the kind of schema that we are going to be using to create a data model. This kind of arrangement, we call it the star schema, because if you look closely, it looks like the points are like stars, okay, with the fact tables in the middle. I mean, the arrangement really doesn't affect the calculation. It's just to help you understand how the filters come from the top and then break down our calculations in the tables down, which are the fact tables. Okay, so now let's go ahead and then connect these tables. So we'll take them one by one. So first take the actual, which is the first fact table, compare with all the dimension tables, identify the common column that will help us connect these two tables. So that common column creates a relationship, right? So first example, if you look at customers has customer ID, right? If I look here, customer ID is also here, right? So for these two tables to talk, I will have to take customers, I will have to take customer ID and then connect it to customer ID. So let's do that. So we just click and hold, right? It could be done the other way around. So click and hold, drag it closely, and then just overlap it to the customer ID here. Okay, so that is what you have here. So now these two tables are connected. If I calculate from here, it can be broken down by any selection here, right? So let's take actual and product. Can you guess what is the common column here? Right, so it's product ID. So I'll take product ID. Okay, click and hold it and then drag and overlap it to the product ID. Now it helps to just put your mouse on the line to be sure that the right labels have been connected, right? The right fields have been connected. So we are using actual to just check against all the dimensions, then we'll switch to budget. Makes it easier. Now let's take location and actual. So over here we have city, okay, and city will now connect to the city over here. Okay, then we'll do actual and calendar. Now you probably want to have a second look at this, because when it comes to the calendar, well, there's dates, which is our primary field in the calendar table, but we have two dates here, order date and delivery date. Truth is that we can connect it to any of these dates in the fact table. So whether we connect to delivery date or order date really doesn't matter, unless you have some specific analysis or calculations you want to do on each of these date columns, right? So any of these will work, but we'll just choose maybe order date for this purpose and then connect it to date. As I mentioned, as long as it's connected and there are no specific calculations you want, right? In some cases, you could actually connect both, but you will learn that there can only be one active connection at a time. So this one will not be active, but the other one will be. So if you have to do a specific calculation, then you can switch and make one active or not. So for now, let's delete this and then keep that connection between order date and the date column in calendar. So that completes the first connection for actual and the related dimension tables. Now let's do for budget. So for budget, I'll take budget and compare to the customer's dimension table. Do we really have anything that connects the two? It doesn't look like, because you realize that the data set that we had, the budget was actually broken down by location, right? So the company actually sets their budget and breaks it down by location. So there's no customer dimension in the budget data. That's why you don't have anything matching here, which is fine, right? So it's same for product, but when we come to location, we can break down our budget calculations by city, right? So I will do for city, and also break down by dates. So I'll connect that one as well. Okay, so all these tables are now connected. It means that if I create my charts, my calculations and visuals, I can calculate and break down. That's the summary of the story here. But let's talk about the lines that you see here. Now, you'll notice that for the lines that connect the tables, there is one against the dimension table and then a star against the fact table, right? So the columns or fields involved here, in this case, is customer ID. You realize that in the dimension table, all customer IDs are represented once. There are no duplicates. Okay, because they are doing the job of breaking down, you don't want any duplicate versions to give you inaccurate insights, right? So in dimension tables, the primary field that we connect to, which we call the primary key, usually should have a unique list with no duplicates. But on the fact side, because customers can buy from us as many times as possible, even in a day, we are free to record as many customer IDs and have duplicates, right? So the star here represents many entries for customer ID. So in summary, the kind of relationship we have here is called a one-to-many, which is normally preferred. There are others like many-to-many, one-to-one, all specific to the case study that you are working on, right? To get some insight on the kind of relationship that you have, if you click on the line and you open up this properties pane, right, it gives you details of the relationship that you have created. So if you open this up, you see the details, right, the kind of relationship you have created. We call it cardinality. Okay, so you can change it from here. There are several options, as I mentioned, right? But for starters, one-to-many is likely what you are going to use. Okay, it also shows you the fields that have been connected as well, and then whether it's active. So all those details are here. So it can be a bit more complex than this, but for starters, this actually is our data model. So by creating it this way, all our calculations from the fact tables can now be broken down or filtered by the attributes in the respective dimension tables, right? So once we are set with this, we can now proceed with our calculations. Okay, so we can now move on to our calculations. We finished connecting our tables in the data model. But before we move on, it will be good to give you an overview of the types of calculations that you can do in Power BI. If you come to the modeling tab, you find the calculations group here. There are 4 icons. Now, in Power BI, when we create calculations, there are basically 3 outcomes. We can create calculations that result in a measure, right? So here, measure is represented by 2 icons, new measure and quick measure. These 2 represent the different ways you can create a measure. So what is a measure? Measures are simply calculations that return a single value at a time, right? So if I calculate and I get total sales, which is 500,000, that's single value, okay, is a measure. But they are not just static single values. These are single values that can recalculate or are sensitive to the data model. So if I create 500,000 and then I filter by a certain branch, that 500,000 recalculates based on whatever filters I've chosen in my data model, right? So they are scalar values. That means they are single values, but they are responsive or sensitive to the current context of your data model in your reports. So that is measures. So 2 ways to create them. You can create them directly using the new measure icon, or you can use the quick measure option here, which is, if you like, a prefab, or you just select and fill in, and then you can get your measures created. Now, in recent times, we have AI-assisted co-pilots where with just a simple prompt, you can actually get your measures created. These are all very simple ways to create a measure. I have not enabled mine yet, but you can also enable yours. This is where the future is. But I think for new learners, it would be good to understand how to create it directly, and then you can use some of these tools to manage when you create using quick measure template or Copilot suggestions, right? So that is the first type of calculation in Power BI. We'll go through this shortly. Apart from measures, we also have new columns. So look at new columns this way, that if you have existing columns, example, if I have quantity, right, and selling price, with just these two columns, I can multiply the values in the row by row entries here and then create a new column called revenue, right? So that is another type of calculation I can do in Power BI. So when we are creating new column, we normally want to be in the table view, okay, so that we can see our columns generated and also see our existing columns. So that is calculation outcome number 2. Then the third type of calculation you can create in Power BI is the table or new table calculation. So sometimes you can create an entirely new table just to filter other calculations, or you can even use these new tables to store your measures, which we are going to use in this case study, right? So just have it at the back of your mind that these are the kind of calculations we can do. It depends on the case study, but measures are very dominant. Now, for all these type of calculations, we use a formula language called DAX, Data Analysis Expressions. Very similar to Excel formulas, but a bit more powerful, a bit more detailed. Okay, so you see some common Excel functions like sum, count, if, and all those regular functions, but there are a bit more powerful ones like SUMX, same period last year, total year to date, and all that. Okay, so with this overview, let's proceed and calculate our first column. Right, so let's start with the column calculation. Now, basically, what we want to do here is to create a revenue column by multiplying our quantity and the selling price. Right, so these two will give us a new column called revenue. Now, while we are here, let's quickly do something we should have done earlier. That is to look out for our calendar table. You know, this is the official date table, right? So once you are here, it will be helpful to mark this as the official date table so that Power BI knows it is going to use this table for all time intelligence calculations, right? So it's very simple. You click on the calendar table in the table view. Okay, you see mark as date table here, right? So I'll click mark as date table. It would require me to select the particular column. So I'm selecting this date column. It validates it successfully and I'll click OK. Right, so with this, everything time intelligence calculations will be referred to this table. Okay, so let's go back to our actual table, and over here, you realize that those icons that you saw have actually followed you here, right? So if you are ready to create any calculation, you look on top, you see at least one of them here. So the process is simple. You just click to launch the type of calculation you want to do. So this is a new column. It starts with a prefix, so column is equal to. Now, anything before the equal sign is the name of your column, right? So here, you can just type over it. You don't even have to backspace or delete it, just type over it. So here I'm creating revenue is equal to. Mind you, I'm creating a new column, so I am here using only columns. I can access the columns in this table using a square bracket. So if I use a square bracket here, all the columns in this active table pop up. So what I'm looking for is quantity, and then I'll multiply this, right, with another column square bracket, selling price, right? So when you type, it pulls it up. Now for our calculation, we are supposed to discount our selling price with this discount field, right? So I'm going to multiply this, open bracket 1 minus, then square bracket, then you call your discount column, right? So it looks pretty like regular Excel formulas, right? So if you are comfortable with structured referencing, then there shouldn't be a problem at all. Okay, so the expectation here is that once I press enter, okay, a new column will be created. Okay, so you see that I have a new column here called revenue. Okay, what it has done is that it has actually used the row by row values, okay, for each transaction, multiplied it, and then created the resulting column for me, right? This row by row behavior is called iteration, right? So it scans, picks the values, multiplies it, and then it throws the corresponding value on the same line. Note this, we are going to use a simpler way to create the aggregate value, that's total revenue, when we come to measures, right? So you can format them. So normally when you click on the columns, you have your formatting options here. So with this one, I can just do a comma separated 2 decimal place format. So I have my revenue created. Let's quickly use the same method and then create for cost. So at this point, it's pretty easy. I'll click on new column. Okay, so this is going to be cost is equal to, this time around, is quantity times unit cost, right? So again, we are going to iterate, use the value setting row by row, and then we'll get our new column here. So again, this I can also format properly, right? Now, the beautiful thing about these calculations is I can use existing calculations I've done to create new ones, right? So I just created revenue and cost. I can just subtract these two, right, and then create a new column out of that. So let's do that quickly. So new column, right? So this time around, I'm calculating profit for each transaction. So this is going to be revenue minus cost. Okay, my 2 new columns, right? Now, when I press enter, just by eyeballing, you see that you have actually subtracted revenue and cost, and these numbers represent your profit for each transaction, right? There are reasons to create new columns, right? So if you have maybe a situation where you want to do row by row calculation, then of course new columns make sense. But the challenge is that if I create these new columns, I will have to aggregate them, okay, to have a sense of the total revenue or total cost or total profit that came in, right? So it is because of this situation that we need measures, right? Calculations that bring us a single value but are still responsive to filters or the context of our data model. Okay, so now that you know how to create new columns, let's bounce to measures and see how to create measures. So if I come to my report view, remember this is where we'll be creating our visuals or our charts, right? So anytime you see this cone and you click on it, it actually displays the thumbnails for all your tables as well as the measures that you have created. In fact, it also shows your calculated columns as well. So you notice that there are new icons here. Okay, so profit, revenue, and cost here are my new columns. Now, by default, the default behavior is that if I take this new column that I created and then I drag it, so I click and hold and I drag it onto the canvas, right, I get a card visual created. Now, in Power BI, when you calculate, they don't really appear directly in a cell like in Excel, right? You have to express the calculation using the visuals, right? So these visuals currently I've used a card visual, okay, to express this, right? I can also use a chart bar or column to also express it with another field, right? We'll get into that when we come to the visualization, right? So in your case, if you drag yours and it didn't come in a card form, you just have to come and then select the card. While selecting your visual, it will change it to the card, right? So the reason we have this 6.75 is that it sees some numbers in this column. So when you drag it, there's this default behavior where it aggregates the numbers in there. We didn't create any formula for this, but it's created a measure using just a profile of the column. Now, this kind of measure, we call it implicit measure, right? So implicit measures sit in the tables that they were created in. In fact, we can't use this to create any other measure. They are restricted to the table, right? So what we actually need to do is to create a sum of revenue directly using measures. This kind of measure will be accessible in the entire data model. You can use it to create other calculations, right? So same way I did for sum of revenue, I can also drag this cost here. So I get my 5 million. If I drag my profit here, I get my 1.48 million, right? So let's leave these for now, and then let's attempt to see if we can create measures that will give us the exact numbers, right? Remember, these are implicit measures, we can't do much with it, right? Now, how do we create measures? So you guessed right. For now, we'll have to look for the new measure icon, right? It can pop up in different places, but just look out for it. So when I click on the new measure icon, just as we saw in the column version, the formula bar opens up, but this time around it starts with measure is equal to. As I mentioned, the name is anything before the equal sign, right? So let's call this actual revenue because we'll be comparing this with budget. Okay, so we call this actual revenue. Now we are going to use a very simple function called SUMX. So SUMX is part of a group of functions we call iteration functions. So basically, for iteration functions, they operate by scanning content row by row, right? So remember how we calculated the revenue column? We picked the value for each transaction, i.e. the selling price and the quantity, and then we multiply this and then also discounted it with the corresponding discount, right? Now this function is going to do all those steps in just one formula, right? So it's a very simple process. We just have to give the table that the iteration is going to happen in. So in this case, it's actual, right? So it steps in there, bring a comma, then we proceed with the calculation. So what kind of calculation do you want to do row by row? So I want to multiply quantity, okay, by selling price. So always you pull your fields with a square bracket, you tap to select, okay. Then I'll have to put in my discount, so 1 minus discount. Okay, it's the same formula that we did for the new column. This is closed, and then my final bracket is also closed, right? Right now you can use these colors to actually put your brackets right. So SUMX actual comma, that's the table. Now the fields involved here is quantity times selling price times 1 minus discount, right? So when I press enter, right, now I have created a measure. I mentioned that measures are single values, but they will rest in your default table. The default table I was operating in is the actual table. Now later we will have to reorganize all our measures and put them in one place, but for now it's okay to have it in the default table. So as I mentioned earlier, if you calculate this, you need to express it using a visual. So let's see if we got the same amount. I'll click and hold and then drag this here, right? So this is what we call an explicit measure. This one, it doesn't sit in just one table. We can access it and use it to recalculate other measures, right? So this is what we'll be needing. So I'll take off this implicit measure. We are going to repeat the process for cost, okay, and the sum of profit as well, right? So let's quickly do that. So to do that, let's come to modeling and then new measure, right? So this one is going to be actual cost. Actual costs, again, we go to SUMX, so we commit the actual table. This one is pretty straightforward. Quantity times the unit cost, right? And then you close your bracket. So once I press enter, I've just created my actual cost. Okay, so again, if I drag this here, okay, I get 5 million. Now, get used to always formatting your measures when you create them. So if I normally press enter, you see that I have access to some formatting options here, right? So if I apply the number format to decimal place, right, I can increase the decimal numbers as well. Okay, so this is the actual value, so it's consistent with the 2 decimal place I'm using, right? So let me delete this one again. I'm just using it to confirm the values. Okay, so this is 5.27 for our actual cost. You can arrange them here. This is going to guide us in our final report. So I have actual revenue, I have actual cost. Now let's do profit. Now for profit, just a simple subtraction. So again, I'll come to modeling, create a new measure. And the truth is that you don't always have to come here. Later you see a simpler way to create your measures instead of coming all the way to the modeling tab. So this is profit. Let's call this actual profit. Right. Now I can call the existing measures. So in the formula bar, when you put in your square bracket, all existing measures pop up. So this is actual revenue minus actual cost. Right. So if I press enter, then I have my actual profits also calculated. Let's see what we got here. So I'll take this actual profit and then drag it all the way here, 1.48. Okay, so let's format this appropriately. It gave us auto, which is actually fine, but get used to formatting it the way you want. So this is our new measure. Let's add profit margin to this. So to calculate profit margin, you need to divide your profit, which we just calculated, over your revenue. Okay, so to do that, we are going to learn a new DAX function called divide. Right, I know the normal calculation is to go straight, pick the numerator, bring the slash and denominator, and you are done. But in Power BI, because of the possibility that some items may be missing, so you may end up with a 0 for a denominator, and you really want to avoid the errors when the measure is filtered. It's good to have a value for an error, right? That's why we use a divide, because the divide function allows us to put in an alternate value if there's an error. So let's use divide. So I'm going to call this profit margin. The profit margin is equal to divide, right? So divide requires a numerator. So the numerator here is going to be the actual profit, comma, denominator here is going to be actual revenue. If I bring a comma, I have the option to put in an alternate result, right? So if there's an error, instead of seeing the error, we want, let's say, an empty string. You can put in anything here, right? So I'll close my brackets and then press enter. So that is my profit margin. This should be expressed in percentages. So once I press enter, I'll just take advantage of the formatting option here and then set it to a 2 decimal place percentage value. So if I drag this down here, 21.88%. So these calculations are measures, very simple. I mean, it can be a bit more detailed, but for new learners, this is one simple way you can create your measures, right? Now, I mentioned that you could use tables to organize your measures. So we've learned how to create columns, we've learned how to create measures. Now let's learn how to create tables, right? So you can use tables to filter, or you can use it in this case to organize some measures. Now, when we go to the modeling tab, right, you guessed right, we'll launch a new table icon. So this opens up the formula bar, but this time around we have table is equal to. Okay, so the name of the table we are going to use is measures, right? Because measures is a technical label in the Power BI space, you cannot really use that name. So usually the workaround is to put a space after or use my measures or my calculations. It's fine. But there's one trick that I found online from Chandeep. So if you want to really use measures as a name of the table, you could do a square bracket, space, and then you type in measures, right? So this trick would allow you to use the name measures. Remember, you're just creating a table. So if I put an equal sign here, ensure that your cursor is blinking right after the equal sign. What are we doing? It's just an empty table. Nothing is here. Okay, so if I press enter, what I expect to see is the table icon now sitting on top of my existing tables, right? So this is my new measures table. It comes with one idle column, which is fine. We can hide that later. So the reason we created this is to actually use it to organize all our measures so that it doesn't actually mix up with the fields in this actual table. Truth is that for measures, they don't need to sit in the existing tables because they belong to all the tables if you like, right? So let's organize by changing their address. So I'll click on the first measure. Measure tools tab is here, right? Where you are able to format, you could also see the option to change the home table, right? So let's move this to the new measures table. Okay, so you realize that I've moved this up. Repeat the process for actual profits. So this also moves to the measures table, and then actual revenue also moves to the measures table. From this point on, what we'll be doing is that if we want to create a new measure, we don't really have to go looking for those icons, right? We can just right click on the table. So this new table you created, when you right click, you have the option to launch a new measure from here. Okay, so that's how we'll be approaching this. When we do it that way, we are sure that the destination of the measure will be in the table designated for it. Okay, for this idle column, we can right click and then hide it so that we just have our measures here. Makes it easier for your user. So we've now created our actual measures and the profit margin. In the story we want to tell, we want to actually compare these actual numbers to budget numbers. So the next set of calculations would bring us the budget revenue, budget cost, and budget profit. Let's go back and look at the structure of the budget table. So if you come to the table view, open up the data pane, and then go and select the budget table, you'll notice that we have the amount all in one column. Now, this amount represents revenue and cost budget values, right? So in simple terms, if I asked you to sum only the budget revenue numbers, one way you approach it is to first sum this column and then filter by revenue, right? So we sum the total amount column and then we break it down by revenue. If I ask you for cost, you do the other way. You sum and then you filter by cost, right? Now, based on the structure of this table, we will use a DAX function called calculate, right? So calculate is a very powerful function in the DAX world. In fact, I dare say it's the most powerful function. So let's see how it works. So I'll go back to the report view, and now that we have our measures table, okay, you can now create a new measure by right clicking and then new measure. Okay, so we are now comfortable here. Let's call this budget revenue. Now, budget revenue, we are going to use this function called calculate. Right. Now, if you look at the tooltip here, or the help for the function, it says it evaluates an expression in a context modified by filters. So the expression is any calculation. From what I explained, the expression could be the sum of the amount column. Once you create this, you have just one single value. But to get revenue or cost, we will now throw in a filter on the type column and say, give us only revenue lines or give us only cost lines. In fact, calculate behaves like sum ifs or average ifs or count ifs, but it's just not limited to summing or counting. Any calculation that you put in the expression zone can be filtered or modified. Right, so that's how it works. So first, let's create that expression. The expression here is sum, tab, budget is the table, amount is the column, right? So sum, budget, amount. Remember to close this bracket to complete the expression, right? Then you bring a comma. What's the filter? So the filter is where budget type is the column that contains either revenue or cost. So where budget type is equal to revenue in this case. Okay, so if you have more than one filter, another comma, and then you go on and on. Right. So this would ensure that for the sum of budget amount you've done here, the version you're going to get are those that are revenue lines. Right, so you press enter, and you see that my measure has been registered in my measures table. So as we always do, let's drag it here and then see what we have. So we have 7 million, but it will be good to format it properly. So comma, and then we push this to decimal place. Alright, so at least just looking at these two figures, over the 2 years of data that we have, it appears we didn't meet our budget revenue. First insight. But later we'll drill down or break down by year or by branch to get a sense of which branches or which date we met or didn't meet. Okay, so let's proceed and use the same approach for budget cost. You can probably just give it a shot ahead of me. So I'll click on this, right click, new measure. This is budget cost. This budget cost is equal to calculate. So my expression is sum budget amount, which is the first calculation on the amount column. Bring a comma. My filter is where budget type this time round is equal to cost in double quotes. Right. So that is the cost calculation for the budget table. So if I press enter, this is my budget cost, right? Now, anytime you are dragging, ensure that you have none of these selected. There's just still one selected. Otherwise, you probably end up replacing it. So just deactivate and then you drag. So budget cost is 5 million. So comma, right, 2 decimal place. And then we have 5.14, right? So here, for our budget, we were supposed to spend 5.14, but we went over it. We actually spent 5.27. Again, we'll break this down and see which product or branches drove this cost. Okay, so now that we have budget revenue and budget cost, we don't really have to use calculate again for budget profits. We just subtract these two. So I'll just right click, new measure. This is going to be called budget profit, and this is a simple subtraction of budget revenue minus budget cost. Right, so I press enter and then comma separator and then push into here, and I'll bring my budget profit over here. So I have 1.73. Right, so these are key measures. This is what drives every chart, every visual on our final report. So now that you've created this, at least you know how calculate works. You can use it to modify any calculation or expression. Okay, so we've made a lot of progress, and in fact we are almost there. Let's take a look at the final work and see what we've done so far. So if you look at the final work, we've actually calculated for actual revenue and we have budget revenue here. So this part is sorted. Same for cost. Then we also have same for profit. We have calculated our profit margin. And then this chart you have here is a breakdown of actual revenue by branch. Okay. So if you look at it closely, what we are left with is the top customer and top product, right? Now, these are measures, but again, they are responsive. So if I go into the branches, I know which product sold well and which customer also served as well, right? So some of these measures can help you focus your resources and all that. So our next journey is to calculate the top customer and then the top product. Okay, so let's start the process quickly. So to do that, we are going to start a new measure. So I'll right click and new measure. Okay, we are going to call this top customer. So this top is equal to the function to return or rank in the DAX world is top n, right? So if I want to rank, returns a given number of top rows according to a specified expression. Now, the specified expression here means that you need to assign a certain measure or calculation for your ranking. Here, we are doing the ranking based on revenue. Okay, so the n value here is 1 because we are looking for the top customer. For the table, we will go to customers. Okay, then I'll bring my comma. Order by expression is what I just explained. On what basis are you ranking them? So we are going to use the measure. So I'll do a square bracket to bring in the actual revenue. And then finally another comma to show how I'm listing it in descending or ascending order. So I'll choose descending, DESC, for that last option, and then I'll close my bracket. Right. Now, this actually is going to return a row, right? The top row that our customer is sitting in, that customer sits in, right? And that is why we are having this error, because the row that currently has been returned contains the customer's name, it contains the customer's segment, and then the customer's ID, right? All these three values cannot appear as a scalar value in this calculation, and that's why we have this error. Thankfully, there's a function we can use to modify this output. So we don't really need to see all the three fields. We can use select columns to go grab that particular column that we are interested in, okay, and then create a new table out of it, something like that, right? So instead of returning three columns, we'll use select columns to modify this output. So please stand in front of top n, okay, and then choose select columns. Okay, so in this case, the table that we are trying to modify is the output here, which is the top n, right? So once you have that, we bring a comma. You need to give the new table you're going to create a name, right? Sometimes you can maybe just as a placeholder name, let's call this customers, right? In some cases, you can leave it blank in between the double quotes, but it's not conventional. So this is a placeholder name for the new table. Okay, now I'll bring my comma. So what I'm actually looking for in that table, the one that I'm interested in, is the customer's name. So customer's name is in customer's customer name, right? So that is the formula I'm going to use. So I'll close my final bracket and go over this again. So the core formula here is top n, right? But we are not interested in all the three fields in the customers table. So we use select columns to modify this existing table, create a new table that only has the customer name. Okay, so once we have the customer name specified, then we'll press enter and we'll have the customer name as our new single value table. So I'll press enter. Now let's see what we get. So I'll click this and then drag it here. Right, that's a beautiful thing about Power BI or the DAX world. Your formulas should not always give you values. This time around, you realize that our output is actually text, okay, and it will be sensitive to all the filters in our dimension tables. So this is our top customer. Let's quickly use the same knowledge and create for our top product. Right, so to create for our top product, I will start here, new measure. This is top product. Go in here, right? So this time around, let's write it from scratch. Right, so select columns, requires a table. So the table is the top N. We are looking for number 1 product. Okay, this time around, we are going into the product table. Okay, again, we are going to order by actual revenue. So that's my third input here. And then we'll sort this in descending order. Right, so I'll close the closing bracket for top N. So this is that virtual table that returns the top row that contains the product record. Right, so select columns is still on standby. So I'll bring a comma. Now I'll give this a placeholder name. We call this product. It could be any name, right? So then for what I'm looking for in that topmost row here, I'm looking for product name, and then I'll close my bracket. Right. So again, just like we did earlier, top N is the core formula. Then we modify the table it gives us to grab the product name. Right. So I'll press enter. So this is our top product, and then once I bring this here, you see we have Ultra HD Smart TV. If I expand this, right? So we have now completed, if you like, all the key calculations in our final report. So from this point on, we are ready to start building our charts and our visuals. Okay, so we've done a lot of calculations and it is time to bring in some interaction and, if you like, some color. If you look at the final work, okay, beyond these numbers, we have a column chart here that breaks down revenue by branch. Okay, we've already taken care of profit margin, top product, and top customer. Then there's a year slicer here that allows us to switch between the years. Okay, then we'll just do our profit margin indicator. Okay, now if you go to the visuals list, so far we used only the card, but there are others here. So there's bar and column, line and area, waterfall and all that. There are even recent additions, a new card, and then a new slicer, right? So all these are possible depending on the kind of story or visual you want to build. Usually, if you come here directly and you set any of these visuals, right, what you get is a placeholder. So for starters, let's use this original slicer. So we'll click on that. Now you notice that because I came here directly, what I get is a placeholder for my visual. There are 2 icons to this placeholder. First one has a cone. Okay, so that one allows you to bring in data to populate the visual. Right. In some cases, you have more than one. Others are mandatory, others are optional. Right. So for the visual, we need to populate it with the year field. Right. So I'll click Add Data, go to my calendar, all my tables are here, and then I'll put in year. Right. Now you notice that the default appearance is the year with a slider between. Okay. If what you get doesn't look good and you want to format, the second icon against the visual or the placeholder is what you use to format. Right. So if I go in here Sometimes I can see some options to turn off or on some of the features, but you can go to more options and then see other options to modify what you are looking for. So for this purpose, I'll come to slicer settings and then change the slicer style. So here, instead of a between, I want a vertical list. Okay, so this allows me to click and choose the year that I'm interested in, right? So we'll be using this method to format all the visuals that we are going to use. Now, if I bring this year here, what does it mean? It means that because of the data model and the fact that this is coming from a dimension table, okay, if I click on a particular year, all these numbers should update and then give me the numbers that reflects the year I've selected, right? So that is how your user interacts. Appreciate where this has come from. Because of the data model, the slicer here is able to filter all the calculations that you have done, right? So that's one level of our interaction. Now, the next thing we are going to do is use the same method to bring in our clustered column chart. So this is what we are going to use. So again, I'll click on this. So it gives me the placeholder, right? And you notice that I'm supposed to input x-axis and y-axis. In this case, these are the only mandatory fields to get this to work. So in the x-axis, we have our branches or our regions, and then the y-axis is our measure, which is the actual revenue, right? So I'll click to add data, go to location, and then look for region, right? So once I click this, I'm not done yet, that's why it's still blank. So I'll go to my y-axis, and then this time around I'm looking for a measure which is actual revenue, right? So I'll check actual revenue, and then you see that this also pops up, right? So that's how you create your visuals. Very simple, as long as you have your measures and your fields on standby, right? These visuals can easily be created. Okay, don't worry about the formatting for now. We are just going to spend some time to make this beautiful. Now, I must touch on the fact that even for the other charts that you bring in, apart from slicers, you can use that to also filter the numbers. So as an example, if I click on any region, okay, because these regions are connected to my data model and it sits in the location dimension table, I can actually see all these numbers update when I click on a particular region, right? So you could add on more visuals just to add some interaction for your user to click and then appreciate what is driving some of these numbers. Okay, so before we go on with the final part of our visualization, at this point it's important you take note of the position of your key measures and then arrange your current measures in that manner. So our revenue, cost, profit sits here, and then top customer, top product here, profit margin, and then we have our revenue by branch and then our switch here. So please take a moment and then arrange the key measures you have. So if you look at it closely, actual revenue is matched to budget revenue, as you can see from here. Okay, so actual revenue, budget revenue, actual cost, budget cost, actual profit, budget profit. Top customer is here, top product is here. All these are cards, right? And then you have your profit margin. Then our clustered column chart is here, and we've put our slicer in the left part of our report. Right now, what we are going to do is to combine these two cards into one, right? So it's easier to just track the performance, whether we're able to exceed or we fell short. The card we are going to use for this purpose is called the KPI. It allows us to track actual versus target and also shows the variance as well. Right, so because of that, I'm going to be deleting all the budget lines. Okay, we'll just embed them or add them to these ones. Okay, so let's select the actual revenue, and then this time around we are going to change the visual from a card to the KPI. So this is a visual we are going to use. So make sure this is selected and then you click on this. Okay, so let's see why this is blank. Normally it's blank when you have not put in the mandatory field. Okay, so this is our value, which is actual revenue. Okay, we have trend axis and then we have target. So the target here is the budget revenue, what you are setting the actual revenue against. So let's click on the add data, come to our measures, and then choose budget revenue from here. Okay, so this is our target, but it's still blank. It means that the trend axis is required. So the trend axis basically is a date field that allows you to monitor your actual and budget. It could be by month, by quarter, or by year, right? So for our purpose, we'll have to throw in year in this space. So add data, we'll find year under calendar, and then we'll choose year over here. So this is what we get. Let me just expand it and then you see. So what this means is that in 2018, the budget or the goal was 2.33 million. Right? You can always go to focus mode to expand, especially useful when you are doing a presentation, right? So if you click on focus mode, the goal was 2.33 million and then we achieved 2.28. So we fell short by 2.04%. I can go back to my report, right? So this is the focus mode. So it's the same method we are going to be using for actual cost and actual profit. Let's do that quickly. So I'll click on actual cost, drop this down, choose the KPI. So when I come in here, I'll use this icon to add my target. So my target here is budget cost. I'll check that one. And then my trend axis is the year. So I'll check this one as well, right? Now let's try and understand what's happening here. Again, I'll go to my focus mode. So we set a target of 1.74 million and then we technically overspent 1.77. In a normal scenario, this should not be green. We'll come back and correct it, because when you spend more, ideally this should be red, showing that you overspent. Right, so part of the learning is to learn how to format this properly. Right, now let's do same for actual profit. So for actual profit, we'll come here and change this to the KPI. Okay, the target here is measures budget profit, and then the trend axis is the calendar year. Right, so again, we see our goal and then our actual, right? So this is our actual against target, and you realize that if I select 2019, I get the 2019 numbers as well. Okay, so this is how you set your KPIs. Okay, almost there. So at this point, you are probably wondering, how are we going to get the colors, the shape background, and all those things, okay, from this blank or bare report? So I'm going to let you in on a little insight when it comes to designing your reports in Power BI. Of course, you can create some of the backgrounds and insert shapes directly in your Power BI report, but one thing that can really enhance your design is the use of PowerPoint. So what I mean is, because the default layout of PowerPoint is the same as the default layout for the canvas in Power BI, you could use that dimension to create a background, right? So that 16:9 dimension, would fit in anything that you see in the slide, right? So this slide has been made available in the folder for the materials for this video. So it's a PowerPoint slide with regular shapes, icons, right? And then you have some text boxes here, right? Now, the reason I prefer this approach is that, designing in PowerPoint is quite flexible. So you can also add your company logo, choose the right theme and all that. So as long as all your design elements can fit in one slide, then the next step is to save your PowerPoint slide as an image, either as a JPEG or PNG or SVG file, and then you load it into your Power BI canvas as a background. So that is what we are going to do. So I already have this slide, so I'll do an F12, save as, okay, and then let me put this on my desktop. So this can be a JPEG, this can be a PNG, or even an SVG file, right? So let's choose a JPEG for now, and I'll save it, right? So just this one slide. Okay, so now that we've saved this as a picture or an image, the next thing I'm going to do is to load it in the background. Okay, right, so click on any empty space in your canvas. Okay, right click and then choose format canvas. Right, this brings up settings for the format of the background. Then you go to the canvas background. Right, so in the canvas background you have the option to browse and load an image. So this is where I am. So I'll click on go to my desktop, and here I have my background image here. So I'll just double click. Right, now when you double click, you are not going to see it appear instantly because the transparency is set to 100%. So what you need to do is to set the transparency to 0%, okay, so that you see it appear in the background. It looks a bit clumsy now, but we are going to go through a process to align everything and put everything in its right place. Right, so you have this now, and the next thing we are going to do is to set the theme for our design. Okay, so come with me to view. So to the left side, you see all the various themes that you can choose. You can actually design your own custom theme as well. But for this purpose, we are going to choose the classic theme, right? I like the soft colors and then the font size. Right, so look for classic. I think it's the last one on the first row in the Power BI theme. So let's select this one, right? So you realize that as we select the theme, it actually sets the font, and then everything seems a bit clearer than we had before. Okay, so at this point, using the background as a guide, right, you can resize all the elements. So starting with this chart, you can just put this in here. Okay, so this will be for your chart. Okay, then you can also realign the top product. So this is that. Then you have your top customer, say Bunsu. You can also align that nicely, right? We'll do the finishing touches, but for this point, it's just to make sure that everything finds their background. So this is for profit, this is for cost, and use the red lines to guide you, right? So that's what we have. Okay, so it looks a bit clearer, not as difficult as you imagine. Okay, so here we are. So the next thing we are going to do is to take each visual and then go in and format each visual properly. Right, so let's go take this first one. Now, as I mentioned, if the format pane is active, you see the format settings here. If it is not, this brush icon would help you access all those details. Let's go through what we have here. So for each visual, you probably have some labels that you want to toggle, turn on, turn off, increase size of font, change color, and all those things. Right, so for this purpose, because our background already has a title, we'll turn off our title, makes it cleaner. The callout value here is the size of the target value, right? So currently set to 45. We can make it 30, right? Again, depends on your screen size, but I think 30 will be fine here. Okay, so that is for the callout value. You can bold in it if you want, or you can leave it as it is. Alignment and everything is here. Once you are done, you can fold it up, right? The icon here is the exclamation mark for red and then a tick for green. We'll leave it on. And then there's the trend axis, right? Now the trend axis, as I said, is for situations where we have a date attribute to help us monitor actual and budget. Usually when we don't select anything from the year filter, okay, you see there are only 2 points here, start and then end, right? Because we don't have a lot of points in a year, it really will not be useful to maintain it. Okay, so it's something that we can turn off. But inside the trend axis, you see color scheme, okay, which shows the direction of your indicators. So for purposes of comparing actual and budget, if my actual is greater than my budget, is it good or bad? So the high is good is what we are going to choose for revenue, right? So these colors can be changed, but we'll maintain the default green, yellow, and red, right? So when we are done, we can turn off the trend axis. Right? That way, if you don't select anything, you don't see the background. But if you have many points, it's a useful feature to turn on. Okay, then we come to the target label, which is the budget label and the variance, right? So if I come here, I can increase this a bit, okay, to make it a bit more visible. So I'm giving it 11, right? So that's that. And then there's an option to display the last date as well. Okay, so if I do that, it tells you that the date that you have selected is 2018, right? I can turn this off. I want to keep it very simple. Okay, so usually when you complete one format, you can actually use the format painter to transfer what you've done on the rest. Okay, but notice that everything would be the same for cost and profit apart from the color scheme for cost. For cost, when we overspend, we want it to be red instead of green. So first, let's apply the format to all the 3 cards, to the next 2 cards, and then we'll come and just tweak this one in the trend axis settings. So I've selected this. I'll come to home. So you click on the format painter, brush is active, you touch this one, it aligns it, you click again, and then you touch this one, right? So at this point, you can now, so at this point, what you can do is you can use Control Select, Control Select, Control Select, okay, go to format, and then you can align either to the top or to the bottom, just to make sure that everything is in the right place. So I mentioned that once we have the formatting applied, we can come to the trend axis, turn it on, and then reverse the logic for this cost, the color scheme of the cost, actual, and budget. So in that case, low is good is what we are going to use, right? Then after, you can turn it off. Okay, so this is what we have. Now let's quickly format the card for the top customer. Very simple. We just need to take off the category label, and then we have a very clean display of our top customer. Same for our top products. So we just turn off this. Can just position it right below. Okay. Now let's create a donut chart for the profit margin. So let me take you to the final work. So basically what we are looking for is a display of the profit margin based on the filters that have been selected, right? But we want it to display showing the portion of the profit margin calculated over 100% ring, right? So if I click on any region, right, this displays the profit margin in that ring. So it's a very, very simple display, and let's learn how to do it. Before you do that, you realize that anytime we select this, right? The portion that we are interested in is the white portion, and then the remainder, okay, is the pink version. So we need to put in these two fields, but we have only profit margin. So we need to calculate that remainder as a measure and then use the two measures to create this donut chart, right? So let's do that quickly. So to do that, I would bring back my data pane. So I'll click the cone and then come to my measures table, right click, and then start a new measure. Okay, so for purposes of this, let's call this remainder. As long as you're able to identify it, is fine. So this calculation is going to be 1 minus, open square brackets, the profit margin that has been calculated. Okay, so I'll press enter. So the expectation is that that remainder is going to be 100 minus this anytime you select the profit margin. Okay, so with these two, we can now insert. So I'm going to take the card off for now and then insert a new donut chart here. So this is my placeholder for the donut chart. So I'll come in here, expand it. As I mentioned, once the default placeholder is in there, you see the requirements. Okay, so here we just need to put in two values. So let's add data, go to measures. First one is, so that's the profit margin itself. It appears we didn't move it to the measures table. That shouldn't be a problem. You have a search bar here. Okay, so you can always search for your measures. So it's left in the actual table. We can move this later, but for now, let's just bring it here. So I'll check this. So that's the profit margin. And then I'll come back and then look for the remainder. So that is the extra, that is the second measure we are going to use here. Okay, so these two should now populate our donut chart, right? So let's clean this up a bit. So first of all, you can expand it, and then we'll take the format icon, go to more options, right? We are going to turn off the title. Okay, we will not need the detailed label. You open up the slicers, and then let's change the colors. So the actual profit margin, we want it to show white. So while here, you can go to spacing, okay, and then increase the inner radius space. Okay, so the higher, the bigger the space you have in the donut chart. So I'll set this to 80%, right? So I left off the color for the remainder, which is going to be this soft pink. Okay, so that is how we are going to use. Now you notice that we are using a red or rosy red theme for this report, right? For Power BI reports, I'm of the opinion you should keep things very simple. So you shouldn't have more than 4 colors. You can always go and create your color palette or use the theme as a guide to choose the colors that you want to use. That's it for the profit margin donut chart, but we want to insert the card here. So I can now drag my card back, use the guide to position it nicely. So for that one too, we'll turn off the category label. We'll reduce the call out value, okay, to about 22, okay, and then change the color to white. Okay, so this now gives us our profit margin. It's responsive, right? So at this point, you see that if you select anything here, it responds, right? Okay, so we're almost there. Let's now turn attention to our clustered column chart. So for this clustered column chart, again, we'll turn off the title to create some more space. Our x-axis is fine. I don't think we'll make any change. Y-axis, we'll turn the values off. Okay, we want to place the numbers on top of the bars. So the y-axis is turned off at the value side as well. So let's go in straight to the columns, and then here we are going to change the color from this green to our default red. So we'll choose this red. Okay. Now, once we choose that, there is also the option to turn on the data labels. So we'll turn on the data labels from here as well. Okay, so that's what we have. So this looks fine. So that's all we are going to do for. So this one is currently showing only the regions, right? But in the final work, you realize that we had the option to drill down to the cities. So in the x-axis, I can add the city field. So I'll come to location and then include city here. Okay, so that the moment I do that, you realize that I now have those icons that allow me to drill down, drill up, move to the next hierarchy and all that. Okay, so I explained how this works. So if you click on your chart now, you have these icons. This drill up will bring you to the region level. If you step down and you activate this one, any region that you click will open up the cities in that region. Okay, you can deactivate it and then see the figures for the particular city that you are in. When you are done, you can drill up and then get back your region, right? This one moves everything down to the next hierarchy, so you see all the cities. You can always drill up and come back, right? But if you had more than 2 levels in the hierarchy, right, this would now expand to the lowest level of the hierarchy. Of course, you can always come back with a drill up, right? It gives you the opportunity to actually drill down at different levels, right? Okay, so that is that. Now, the last thing that we are going to do is to put in this profit margin indicator. Okay, so if you look at the final work, what the profit margin indicator tells us is assuming that the company has set a threshold of 20% to just mark performance across the locations. So for those who are able to meet it, it lights up green, but if you are not able to meet it, then it's red. So you see the case of the Volta region in 2019, it fell below the threshold. So this shows red. Okay, so how do we make this dynamic? So we are going to learn how to insert buttons and then use a dynamic measure to achieve this. So back here, what we are going to do is to first go to insert, okay, and then insert a shape, right? So you can insert shapes and format them in Power BI. So this is one basic oval shape, right? So you click on it, right? You may need to adjust it, eyeball, and then turn it into a circle. So this is what we have. We position it here. Now the format for this pops up. There's a few things that we can do here. So first, let's concentrate on the shape style, right? That's the important thing. So in the shape style, we already chose the oval. Okay. Now the fill is why we are here. How do we make the fill change color based on a certain condition? So if you open up the fill, now you'll notice that apart from the color option, there's an FX, right? So you can actually put in a formula that defines when it's red and when it's green. Okay, so anytime you see an FX, it means you probably have to input a measure or a calculation. Now, let me explain how this will work. So it's a simple if statement that states that if the profit margin that has been selected is greater than 20%, which is the cutoff, then show green. Otherwise, show red. The beautiful thing about DAX formulas is that you could actually put in colors if you know the hex code of the colors you are interested in, right? So let's go to the finished work and let me pick the colors that we used. So the measure that we used here is the profit margin indicator, right? A very simple formula. So the name is profit margin indicator. If profit margin, which is our existing measure, is greater than 0.2, then this is the hex code for the green color in double quotes. Otherwise, give us the red color, which is also in double quotes. So let me copy this, but of course it would be easier if you could type this yourself, but I'm going to display it so once I copy, I'll come to my measures, right click, and then new measure. So once the formula bar opens up, I can paste this. So this is the full formula. Okay, so profit margin indicator is equal to if square brackets profit margin is greater than 0.2 comma, then hash 01B8 double A close double quote comma double quote hash FD625E close double quote, right? So that is what we are going to use. Press enter, our measure arrives. So this is the profit margin indicator. So it is this measure we are going to use to control the color of this shape. So let's go back to where we were. So I'll click on the shape, go to the format, and then come to shape style, right? Open up the fill and then engage the FX icon, right? So over here you have options. You can use a gradient, you can use rules, okay, or you can use a filled value. So let's choose a filled value for this purpose, and then this allows us to select the measure that will be applied in this case. That is the profit margin indicator, right? So if I put this in here, then whatever formula we put in there, once the condition is triggered, we get the right color. So let's click OK. Right, now we need to test it. So the red should show in 2019 for the Volta region. So we have it as shown because this falls below the 20% threshold. Okay, so now that we've achieved this, the rest is just final touches. So you can just squeeze this in a bit. Okay, in the shape style, we can turn off the border line. Okay, and then maybe engage the shadow as well to just make it a bit nice on the screen. Okay, so this way, even if you're not looking at the numbers and you're concentrating on just this small indicator, then you should be able to see the branches that did well and those that did not do well. So if you have come this far, congratulations. There's a lot of learning in what we've done so far. We've been able to build this report in Power BI desktop. So we've gone through Power Query, data model, created our DAX calculations, then some insights with designing in Power BI, formatted our visuals, and this is what we have. So in this story, this is actually part one. As I mentioned, beyond this page, what we can do is to add a second page for drivers. Okay, so in the drivers page, we should now get an understanding of what is driving some of the numbers that we see here. So you learned how to drill down, but you could also drill through, okay, to see what the top products and the top customer are in each region. Okay, in the second part of this series, we'll learn how to put in some of these navigation to help you interact and get to the bottom of some key drivers for your indicators. Another thing that is very important too is after you are done with your work in Power BI desktop, you have the option to publish. In fact, there's a lot you can do in the Power BI service. Okay, as I mentioned, you can share online, you can collaborate with your colleagues, embed in PowerPoint presentation, Power Apps, and all those things. Okay, but if you are here, this is a good milestone, this is a good achievement. If you want to really continue the journey, then you can join us for our upcoming Power BI workshop session, which starts on 24th February. We are going to use this case study as foundation and then build on to see what we can do in Power BI service. So we'll add on the second page and then include all the drivers and also show you some options available to you when you publish to Power BI service. Right, so class starts 24th February 2024. You can register here. Okay, it's workshop style, so you can join us in person or online. So thank you so much. If there are any suggestions or feedback or questions, please feel free, put them in the comments. We'll be happy to respond. In the meantime, keep practicing, do more case studies, and use the foundation you have received to build your Power BI skills. All the best. Thank you.
If this video was helpful and you would like to receive more of these videos directly on your WhatsApp, you can send ad to this WhatsApp number. We'll add you to our broadcast list so you receive our videos directly. You can also visit our YouTube channel, Finance Skills Hub. All our old videos are here. Please subscribe for notification of new videos or connect with us on any of these social media handles. Thank you so much for watching.